Alofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Suisuiki. Coming up,
the priority that we have given to foreign aid in this era of geopolitical competition is a lot less.
A researcher says more focus on defence will hurt foreign aid. Also, Pacific Super Rugby teams prepare for their clash. And
he was credited with the revival of the Hawaiian culture.
The Merry Monarch Festival begins this week. There are concerns in Australia that as more emphasis goes on defence spending, foreign aid will suffer. This comes amid the growing geopolitical tensions in the region, with the US calling on its allies to spend more on their militaries. Australia is already one of the least generous aid donors at just 0.14% of GDP, with that figure set to continue to fall in real terms. A researcher with the Australian National University's Development Policy Centre, Cameron Hill, has been looking at the comparison with defence spending. He spoke with Don Wiseman.
We started tracking this about 5 years ago in 2020, and my colleague Stephen Howes, looked at the aid and defence spend data going back to the early 1960s. It was the height of the Cold War, and we were engaged during that decade in the Vietnam War. And during that period, the relativity between our spending on defence and foreign aid over the decades of the Cold War averaged around 7-1. And then from about 2015, we noticed that this ratio really started to widen to an unprecedented level. So it seems as though, I guess, that the priority that we have given to foreign aid in this era of geopolitical competition is a lot less than the priority we gave to foreign aid during that last big era of geopolitical competition, which was the Cold War. So the ratio currently is about 12-1 on existing budget commitments and forecasts. It will widen further to about 13-1 by the end of this decade. And then if, as some have called for, we increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by the end of the decade, that ratio will be 16-1. And if, as some in the US have hinted that they'd like Australia to spend 3% of GDP on defence, it would widen to 19-1. That's almost 3 times its Cold War average.
And what's the impact?
Well, I guess the impact is that we prioritising our elements of, hard power much more than what some people would call our soft power. But I think when we look at Australia's region, most of the countries around us are developing countries, and they're certainly worried about geopolitical competition, but we're also predominantly worried domestically about their development prospects, growth and human development, and for many of them, the potential impacts of climate change. So I guess looking at these figures, a lot of foreign policy commentators in Australia like to talk about integrated statecraft, combining development, diplomacy, defence to ensure Australia can compete effectively. I think the problem here is that we're really undervaluing a critical element of that statecraft when you look at these relativities.
Australia's had some issues with its Pacific neighbours going back the last 10 or 15 years, and this could exacerbate that.
I think Pacific states rightly want Australia and New Zealand to be doing more on climate change, and much of that funding has to come from our development assistance budget, our climate finance. But with that budget remaining flat, our ability to respond to those calls from the Pacific is compromised. And I guess Pacific states, again, are worried about geopolitical competition and some aspects of that. But I think increasingly they'll see or be concerned that Australia is under prioritizing that element of its foreign policy relative to these hard power priorities. And I think this is important also in the context of big cuts to aid, and including climate aid from the US, as well as cuts to aid from other donors. So that will just increase the pressure on very scarce climate finance, which is a key priority for Pacific states.
And an area that the region expects Australia to step up in.
Absolutely. So again, I'm not an expert on defence spending, but this gap in the relativities is quite stark. And it just begs the question, what are the constraints to Australia doing more on development and climate internationally. You could say perhaps that the foreign policy elite in Australia have just decided that aid is not very useful when it comes to geopolitical competition. And perhaps that's right. But I do think aid, including climate finance, can help meet other important policy objectives. We can see that climate needs, humanitarian needs are just increasing. And a big part of Australia's foreign policy should be showing up to help tackle those global problems. The domestic politics of aid have also been difficult in Australia, you could argue. But I think there's a danger that we preempt the difficulties domestically of increasing aid, and that cautious consensus that some have talked about when it comes to aid spending in Australia has turned into a pernicious paralysis, whereby politicians are just too afraid to defend aid and to talk about why aid might need to be increased over time. Also, it may be that the cost of defence is just very expensive now, but again, I would argue that aid has also become more expensive, including in the Pacific, where climate impacts do drive up the cost of aid.
The Battle of the Pacific is going to be an exciting clash to watch when Moana Pasifika hosts the Fijian Drua in North Harbour on Saturday. Renowned for their physicality and flair, Fijian and Poly as one can call them, the two teams go head-to-head for the first time in Albany. Both camps are wary of what the other can do, and head coaches Whaalongo Tana Umanga and Glenn Jackson have named their respective Matchday 23s accordingly. Around 10,000 fans are once again expected to pack the North Harbour Stadium for the much-awaited Super Rugby Pacific Round 11 clash. Elias Satora has been following the teams.
Drua head coach Jackson says they know they must start well and finish well against their Pasifika rival, who have proven to be a strong second-half team in their recent victories. The Drua are hoping to roll with their big win over the Waratahs last weekend in Lautoka, but no Moana Pasifika will be a different kettle of fish. Adding their lineup have been named to counter what they expect from their hosts.
Our scrum against the Waratahs was outstanding. Certainly going to have to be a strength against Moana. They'll be hurting from being nilled because they've been awesome this year, especially inside the 22. I think they're the best team of getting inside the 22 and then scoring points. And I know they'll be pretty fired up for this game. So again, we're just got to make sure we've got the fittest guys who are ready to play rugby away in Auckland.
Jackson is hoping his Fijian Drua Warriors will replicate their last quarter finish against the Waratahs last weekend, and says last week's win can motivate his players.
I think they've been training really well. Sometimes a win can just get a bit of a snowball effect and carry on. We knew the Waratahs was a big game for us, and I thought the way the boys handled, especially the last sort of 15 minutes when they had a real good crack on our line when it was 21-14 and we held them out with the winning of the game. That's certainly something we're going to have to do well against Moana to carry on.
Whaalongo Tana Umanga says Moana Pasifika are wary of the Fijian flair and will just have to focus on what they can control on the day.
Because it's hard to fight against Fijian flair because it's huge. And so for us, it's just around making sure we just focus on ourselves and what we can control. Be very wary of what they do because they're so unpredictable, but predictable, if that makes sense. We just got to make sure that we do everything that we do well,
Umanga says consistency is critical for them going into the game, especially at the back end of the competition when they are also chasing a top 6 finish.
The thing for us is just being consistent in the whole game. At the start of the year, our attack was going well, but we were leaking a lot of points. Lately, our defence has been going well, but we haven't scored as many points as we'd like. So, again, it's just putting that whole performance as every team's looking for, especially at this back end of the season.
Meanwhile, Moana Pasifika captain Adi Savea says he knows the challenge the Fijians will present for his side, adding they will have to be ready to change and adapt to the game situations.
For me, it's like I know what they're capable of and they've shown it last week and what they can do. So, hopefully, we've got a plan around that and try and nullify that. But you just never know what the game brings. And for us as leaders, we've just got to try and play our best, but also adjust to certain things that we might not be prepared for.
The big clash kicks off at 4:35 p.m. Other matches in round 11 of the Super Rugby Pacific competition will see the Chiefs taking on the Western Force at 7:05 p.m. on Friday, before the Reds host the Blues in Brisbane. Saturday's other matches will be between the Highlanders and the Crusaders in Dunedin, with the Brumbies hosting the Hurricanes in Canberra.
The The festival that was envisioned by one of Hawaii's former kings returns this week, celebrating Hawaiian arts and culture. Now in its 62nd year, the Merry Monarch Festival is a week-long event and is a continuation of what King David La'amea Kalakaua started, a patron of the arts, especially music and dance. Hosted in Hawaii's Hilo Island this year, the festivities include the prestigious 3-night hula competition, Miss Aloha Hula, and the Merry Monarch Royal Parade. I spoke with Luisa Tipene Opetaya, who's currently in Hilo attending the festival.
Aloha, yes. Okay, so the festival started in 1963 here in Hilo, which is on the Big Island, the Mokuokeawe. And it actually started to boost tourism and to bring people to Hilo. But yeah, it quickly became, now 62 years later, so this is the 62nd festival. It is the premium event for hula competition. So the best groups from around the Hawaii Islands come and compete. But it's not just the hula. So a lot of people think it's just the hula because that's what, gets shown on TV and that's what gets shown on the live stream around the world. But it's actually a week-long event. So it always starts the Sunday of Easter weekend and begins with like an opening ceremony. So obviously they do have the hula and that's later on in the week, but they have art fairs, as in, crafters come and sell their traditional, work that people can come and buy. They have a parade. This year they've got a fashion show. So it's really just a huge celebration of Hawaiian culture.
So this festival's been going on for 62 years. How many people does the festival attract on a yearly basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they always have it in the same venue, which is the Edith Kanakaole Stadium. It's actually a tennis stadium, and it, transforms into the home of hula every spring. But actually, it's quite a small stadium, so it's only 5,000 people can fit into the stadium. So every year, a whole lot more people want to come than actually have tickets available. So it's really hard to get tickets. A lot of the seats get taken up by all of the performers, and their families. And so there aren't that many tickets that can be, made available to the public. So they actually do a ticket lottery system. So you have to apply for tickets. You got to send in it's a real old school. They do it all through the mail. So you got to send in an application form and you got to send in a money order. And you do that at the end of the year, so in December, and then a couple months later, you find out whether you got in or not. And if you get tickets, then you're one of the lucky ones. But if not, you get your money order back, and you have to watch the live stream with the rest of the world.
Well, that's such a process. But as a festival enthusiast yourself, how long have you been attending the event?
How many have I attended?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't even know. So I lived in Hawaii so I live in New Zealand now, but I lived in Hawaii for 7 years. So I used to come every year when I lived here. And then even when I moved away, I would come back. So gosh, I don't even know, maybe 10? Yeah,
that's
I try to come
lot.
as much as I can. Yeah. I try to come as much as I can. I haven't been since 2019, so before the pandemic. So this is I've had a big break, and now I'm coming back, and so I'm so excited to be back because I love this event. When I have to watch the live stream in New Zealand or anywhere else in the world, I just have huge FOMO because there's nothing. I mean, the live stream is great and it's amazing, and it does help people who don't get tickets. You can still feel like you're part of it, but when you watch hula, you don't just watch with your eyes, you watch with your, you can feel the drum beat like going through you, and you can smell the flowers, and you listen to the chanters and you listen to the music. So it's a whole sensory kind of overload, but it's a whole sensory experience, and you don't get that watching the live stream, as good as it is. And, sometimes you can't get to Hilo. It's amazing that you can still be, you can still be part of it, but there's nothing like being there.
Hey, I was just wondering, like with Polyfest and other cultural festivals, is Merry Monarch open to having non-Kanaka Māori participate in the performance and pageantry aspects?
Yeah, so on Wednesday night, they have what they call ho'ike, which means like non-competitive. And so that's the night when they invite people from around the Pacific and around the world to come and share their culture. So there is a Māori culture group that's here, Angitu, they're from Auckland, and they will be performing on ho'ike night, Wednesday night. I've seen in the past, groups from Tahiti, groups from Samoa, Rapa Nui, all those guys can get to come and and perform, non-competitive. And also they invite other hula groups from around the world, hula is very big in Japan, it's really big in Mexico, and they have groups there. Then they don't get to come and compete at Merry Monarch. You have to be invited. And really, they've never had a group, outside of Hawaii on the competition night. But they will invite you to come if you're doing good and they want to support you. They may invite you to come to the non-competitive night, which is a real privilege, for those groups that are from outside of Hawaii.
Would you also say that this festival, in a way, is a form of resistance towards colonization, or is it just purely a celebration of Hawaiian culture?
I think it is. No, I definitely agree with that. So the name of the festival is the Merry Monarch, and it sounds weird, but it is after their former king, David Kalakaua, and he was credited with the revival of the Hawaiian culture and the Hawaiian language. And so that's why they've named this festival after him, because of what he did, to bring back this dance that actually was, was outlawed by the colonizers who came in, and, they tried to take these kinds of things away from us, practicing our traditional healing methods, dancing and singing our songs, and, they tried to take those things away from us. And so he was responsible for, bringing it back. And so that's why the festival is named after him. And I do feel like, all of the things that happen, it's just such a pro-Kanaka Maoli, pro-Hawaii time. It is showing that, despite colonization, despite all the things that we've gone through and the trauma, we are still here.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.